Hello, my dear listeners. This episode is all about the topic of hormesis and the crucial role of hormetic reactions in our health. First, let's clarify what hormesis actually means. You may be familiar with Friedrich Nietzsche's words, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger," or Paracelsus' quote, which is over 500 years old, "It's the dose that makes the poison." But today we know that there is more to these statements than one might initially suspect. We now know that many stressors, in the right dosage, can actually be beneficial for our health. These stressors include hunger, heat, cold, and physical strain. When they occur in the right dosage, they trigger a compensatory reaction in our body that strengthens our resilience. A clear example of this is the physical strain involved in sports. Here, physical strain acts as a stressor that affects the muscles. In response, the body strengthens the muscles to prepare them more effectively for future stress. Hormesis describes the biological effect in which small doses of harmful substances or stimuli, generally referred to as stressors, can have a positive effect on our organism. It is even possible to slow down the aging process through hormesis. However, before I get to practical tips for everyday life, I would like to provide more context about why stressors can actually be beneficial to health. During evolution, humans and their ancestors were constantly exposed to life-threatening situations. This means they had to adapt in order to survive. These adaptations were then passed on and are still present in us today. They enable us to defy adverse circumstances and remain functional. Nowadays, thanks to technological advances, we often have the opportunity to avoid most of these stressors in everyday life. We have constant access to food and can dress warmly or adjust our environment to comfortable temperatures. But if we avoid these hormetic stimuli, it has negative effects on our health and life expectancy. Our resistance atrophies, similar to muscles that are not used in atrophy. A lack of stress is also associated with a lower ability to regenerate, and this is crucial for the aging process. It is therefore important that we regularly expose ourselves to these original stress stimuli in order to restore our resilience. Let's take heat as an example. If the ambient temperature is above around 40 degrees Celsius, damage to our proteins occurs. Our proteins are designed to function optimally at a body temperature of around 37 degrees Celsius. Within a hormetic range, which is influenced by our body's habituation to heat, for example through sauna sessions, health-promoting adaptive reactions begin. Thus, heat shock proteins are formed within this area to restore the damaged proteins and protect other proteins from damage. This shows how our body can respond to stressors to increase its performance. As with all hormetic stimuli, the ideal dose depends on our body's habituation to the respective stressor. People who go to the sauna regularly are more accustomed to heat and more resistant to higher temperatures. This means they can stay in the sauna at higher temperatures for longer before damage occurs. However, there are also limits that cannot be exceeded through such habituation. This principle of hormesis can be applied to different areas of our lives to improve our health and quality of life. In the coming episodes, we will take a closer look at these practical applications. It is important to understand that the relationship between the stress dose and the individual resistance of the person is crucial for a hormetic response of the body. There is no linear dose-response relationship. Otherwise, there would be no threshold for a harmful dose, and even small doses would have negative effects. Instead, a hormetic dose response looks like this. There is an individual range in which a health-promoting adaptive response occurs, and outside this range, the exposure leads to harmful effects. Hormetic effects extend to different levels of the body. Organs and the body's own systems such as skin, immune system, endocrine system, cardiovascular system, brain, and muscles are mainly dependent on stress in order to improve or maintain their function. For example, the immune system is trained by everyday infections and would regress in a sterile environment. The muscles and passive musculoskeletal system, which includes bones, joints, ligaments, cartilage, and intervertebral discs, require mechanical stress in order to maintain or develop. They are dismantled when not in use. These examples illustrate how hormetic stimuli affect the body. However, it is not just about maintaining functions, but also about improving them through hormetic stimuli. Specifically, it is now about the health and fitness promoting effect of hormetic stimuli, which is based on the principle of supercompensation. One of the most well-known examples of this is muscle building. For example, during intensive training, small injuries occur in the muscle tissue, which leads to a temporary decrease in performance. During the recovery period after training, the body repairs these injuries and returns to its original performance level. But that is not how it remains. The body builds additional muscles in order to be better prepared for similar stresses in the future. However, this only works if the stress was intense enough. In the case of strength training, the intensity must have been high enough to signal to the body that the existing muscles are not sufficient. Supercompensation involves the regeneration of the damage caused by hormetic stimuli, as well as an additional increase in performance to better cope with future stimuli. A particularly serious stress factor for our body is hunger, or lack of food. Throughout the history of human development, lack of food has repeatedly represented a life-threatening situation, but it did not necessarily lead to death. In order to find new food and not starve, the body at such moments put our ancestors into a state of maximum activity, increased alertness, and resilience. The adaptation of our ancestors to starvation to the calorie deficit increased our performance. In addition, other processes were stimulated that had a positive effect on health. This stimulated the body's own recycling program, autophagy. In a state of starvation, the body increasingly eliminated excess or defective material, both inside and outside the cells, and used these resources to generate energy and rebuild new cellular structures. This self-cleansing helped us to benefit from improved health, as long as the starvation state did not last too long and micronutrient needs were met. These processes can now be used in everyday life, for example by practicing intermittent fasting, regular therapeutic fasting, or a time-limited diet with a calorie deficit in order to stimulate the recycling programs in our body. A simpler method than maintaining a calorie deficit or fasting is to use so-called calorie restriction mimetics. These substances, such as spermidine, activate signaling pathways in the body similar to those of starvation. Unfortunately, the effect of calorie restriction mimetics does not appear to be as strong as that of a true calorie deficit. Nevertheless, it makes sense to combine different approaches. For example, you can increase the proportion of calorie restriction mimetics in your diet and at the same time practice intermittent fasting, for example by skipping breakfast or even better, skipping dinner, so as not to disrupt the nightly HGH release. HGH stands for human growth hormone and plays an important role in the body for growth, regeneration, and other processes. In this way, a short hunger phase of over 12 hours can be created overnight, which, in combination with the increased proportion of calorie restriction mimetics, should have an increased positive effect on health and life expectancy. For information, autophagy usually only reaches its maximum after 72 hours, for example during therapeutic fasting. However, it is important to note that autophagy is constantly occurring in the body and is increased by certain stimuli, such as prolonged fasting or other hormetic stimuli. This means that even if the calorie restriction mimetics and intermittent fasting cannot increase autophagy to the maximum, the rate of autophagy is still increased compared to before. It is important to note that nothing should be eaten or consumed between meals that increase insulin levels, as high insulin levels inhibit, among other things, autophagy, and thus the health-promoting effect is reduced. In order to further increase the stimulating effect of autophagy during the fasting phase, it is advisable to increase physical activity in everyday life, for example by walking more or doing more sport in general. Sport and exercise can not only have a positive effect on the body's cleanup programs due to increased energy requirements, but can also strengthen the entire musculoskeletal system as a hormetic stimulus. If you take a closer look, it becomes clear that endurance sports promote long-term growth of the heart muscle, while the core muscles stabilize posture. Exercise also increases metabolism due to the increased energy requirement and promotes the production of free radicals. These additional free radicals can initially damage the body. In a second step, however, the body increases the production of endogenous antioxidants such as catalase and superoxide dismutase, and repair and waste elimination programs are stimulated. And now things get particularly interesting again, because this is where supercompensation comes into play. The repair and waste removal processes eliminate both newly created damage and pre-existing cellular waste and damaged structures. This results in health gains as the cell waste and damaged structures place a burden on cellular health. Another hormetic stimulus that can occur during intense exercise is oxygen deprivation, also known as hypoxia. This lack of oxygen activates a special signaling pathway that can also lead to health benefits. Specifically, a lack of oxygen activates the so-called HIF, the hypoxia-induced factor. This transcription factor regulates the oxygen supply to cells by keeping the oxygen demand and supply in balance. HIF binds to a specific section of our DNA called the HRE, hypoxia response element. When HIF binds to HRE, it leads to the production of various proteins, including growth factors, which promote the growth of blood vessels. This aims to provide better oxygen supply to the cells in various tissues. In addition to heat, hunger, and lack of oxygen, there are many other ways to use hormetic reactions to your advantage. For example, phytochemicals in our food can have positive effects on health despite their toxicity. Plants cannot escape from environmental conditions, predators, and pests, so they produce substances to protect themselves. These substances, which we know from untreated plant foods, are essentially known to us as secondary plant substances. These include alkaloids, carotenoids, and cannabinoids. Plants use carotenoids to protect themselves from environmental influences such as radiation. For example, in our body, carotenoids can be converted into vitamin A, which is important for various processes, including growth, skin and mucous membrane functions, metabolism, and vision. Cannabinoids protect plants from microorganisms such as bacteria and fungi. Prosody cannabinoids work by intervening at the molecular level in the metabolic processes of microorganisms, and thereby inhibiting their growth and reproduction. Alkaloids, on the other hand, are intended to protect plants from predators such as insects and herbivores by causing digestive disorders and intolerances. It is important that secondary plant substances in our food do not occur in a toxic dose, but increase stress in the hormetic range, which allows our body to experience a positive, health-promoting adaptive response. This also applies to natural, unprocessed foods. It is therefore important to note that secondary plant substances are not taken in isolated form or in highly concentrated preparations, but rather naturally as a whole, together with untreated plant material. This is because it is difficult to achieve a harmful dose of phytochemicals by consuming plant-based foods, as the biological availability here is rather low. In contrast, taking secondary plant substances through dietary supplements can even be dangerous, as a toxic dose could be reached more quickly. The final hormetic stimulus I would like to discuss here is the cold stimulus. Similar to heat, cold is an environmental stimulus that puts strain on our bodies because we are homeothermic creatures. In our case, this specifically means that our core body temperature must be kept at around 37 degrees Celsius, otherwise our internal processes will be disrupted. This can lead to disruption of normal metabolism and hormone regulation and the activity of the autonomic nervous system. Exposure to cold initially leads to a compensatory response via the nervous system, respiratory and cardiovascular systems. The nervous system signals thermal protection, which results in tremors and the constriction of skin vessels. At the same time, breathing deepens and accelerates to absorb more oxygen and warm the body. Additionally, the heart rate increases to increase blood flow and provide heat to the vital organs, thereby maintaining body temperature. What has been said so far may give the impression that exposure to cold is more harmful than beneficial. However, exposure to cold in a controlled setting can also have positive properties, as long as we stay within our individual hormetic range. For example, showering with cold water increases our alertness because the sudden cold stimulus triggers increased blood flow and activity in the nervous system, which leads to increased alertness. In addition, the immune system can be strengthened, stress reduced, mood improved, and muscle tension reduced in the medium to long term. Cold water can also help shrink the skin's pores, reducing the buildup of impurities. Particularly noteworthy here is the training effect on the cardiovascular system, which can be generated by repeated cold stimuli in the hormetic range. This effect can also occur in combination with alternating heat stimuli, such as sauna sessions followed by cold baths. Prolonged exposure to cold leads to an increase in brown adipose tissue. This tissue is brown because of its high number of mitochondria, the energy-producing organelles in our cells. Normally, mitochondria generate ATP, the body's main source of energy, in an efficient sequence of energy transfers in the respiratory chain. However, in brown adipose tissue, the respiratory chain can become uncoupled in cold weather, resulting in less ATP production and instead releasing more energy in the form of heat. Stimulating the production or activity of brown adipose tissue by cold causes an increase in our energy levels and increases the production of body heat by breaking down fats in a process called beta oxidation, which also occurs in the mitochondria. Interestingly, therapeutic cold stimuli could also have an influence on the aging process. In model organisms such as the nematode C. elegans, prolonged cold exposure has been shown to delay germline aging and increase fertility. This cannot be extrapolated to humans, but studies on mice also show a health-promoting effect of cold, which is associated with an increase in brown fat tissue and an extension of lifespan. Now, humans are not mice, but the fact that these results could be reproduced in mice gives rise to hope that similar effects could also be possible in humans. The increasingly popular cold therapies and the everyday use of cold showers therefore have great potential to positively influence well-being and health. You can easily experience the effects of cold through short weekly showers, but you should be careful not to overdo it and ease into the cold slowly. However, before you use hormetic stimuli on your own, it is advisable to consult your doctor first. There are contraindications to hydrotherapy, whether with cold or warm water. For example, if you already have a health condition such as asthma, cardiovascular disease, or infections, you should not take a shower that is too hot or too cold. Finally, I would like to summarize the principle of hormesis. Hormetic stimuli and the body's reaction to them take place in 3 steps. First, protection and resistance to the respective stimulus is built up. Second, as a result of supercompensation, an excessive adaptive response occurs, strengthening the body for future stimuli. And finally, the third step involves repairing acute and even previous damage that would likely have gone unnoticed and accumulated without the hormetic stimulus. Thank you for tuning in to our episode. If you enjoyed this content, please consider giving us a thumbs up and subscribing to our channel for more. We hope you continue to stay safe, healthy, and happy. See you in the next one.